Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment for the VAIO SX14. Now, this 14-inch ultrabook is, much like the SX12, one of the most powerful on the market in that you have an Intel Comet Lake Core i7 6-core processor under the hood, standard for the SX14, standard for the SX12. What it really comes down to is the balance of the configurations, whether you want 8 or 16 gigs of RAM, and whether you want a 512 gig or 1 terabyte SSD. Now, the NVMe drive on board is a Samsung best-in-class pretty much. You're not going to look to upgrade that out of the box. I mentioned this in my SX12 review. And the SX14, especially the model I have here, shares much of what the SX12 has nearly in common. It's basically identical in terms of the internals. Same processor, at least my review units both have 16 gigs of RAM and both have the same Samsung half terabyte drive. Of course, with the 14-inch model, what you are getting is that 14-inch display. Now, this is only a full HD matte IPS display. Unfortunately, I did not get a 4K option here, even though VAIO does have a 4K SX14. In fact, the one I reviewed last year was the 4K model. And that is a better display. Inherently, all of the 4K panels, I don't care what manufacturer you go with, you get generally better color accuracy, wider gamut, all of those things. So reproduction is just better, not just because you have more resolution, but that tends to be the way that these panels lean in terms of overall quality. Now, that doesn't mean the full HD panel is bad. I definitely prefer the SX14 to the SX12 because for the weight difference, I mean, the SX12 is literally about 2 pounds. This is, I think, 2.3. So SX12 with the battery charger a little over 2 pounds. This guy right here with the battery charge, you know, it's still under 2.5 pounds with a 14-inch display. That's just really unmatched in the marketplace unless you go with, I don't even know. I was going to say something like a Surface Pro, but you're not going to get to the 14-inch display size, maybe next generation. Also, you're not going to get that Comet Lake processor, but this is still expensive. Carbon fiber build, the VAIO brand, again, as I mentioned in my SX12 review, very much alive and well. So all of the design cues, the design language really speaks to, if you were a VAIO user over the years, it's all still here. That also means that VAIO is still incorporating all of the I/O. It's a rhyme that I tend to make with this because VAIO does it right, and I'll show you right now. So on the right side of the machine, we've got basically every port you could possibly want. A full-size SD card slot, a Type A USB port, a Type C port, not Thunderbolt 3, so purely connectivity. You're talking about 4K at 60 hertz, you're talking about charging, and of course file transfer. Then you've got a full-size HDMI port that is capable of 4K at 30 hertz, so less than ideal, but still good to have in the arsenal. Ethernet, and then, believe it or not, yes, a VGA port. This is not something that VAIO is going to give up on. On the other side of the machine, we've got an additional 2 USB-A ports, your lock and headphone jack, and the power connector, a pin-type connector that VAIO's been using pretty much forever. We do have a fingerprint reader right there. We have a Windows Hello compatible IR camera at the center top of the bezel. And, you know, overall, I do think that VAIO does a very good job with design on this machine. The fact that, as I mentioned, the design language has stayed constant, but yet I don't feel like I'm looking at a dated product, even though you can clearly see the lineage, is impressive because virtually every other manufacturer has had to redesign everything from the ground up. I mean, when I talk about the HP that I use as my daily driver, the Spectre X360 13T 2-in-1, that thing has evolved from the original Spectre and doesn't even look like the original in many ways now with that 90% screen to bezel, to body rather, ratio. So VAIO impressively has stayed in terms of their design cue right in line. And when you look at this, it's unmistakable if you know what Sony used to make and what VAIO continues to. And of course, VAIO is no longer part of Sony, hasn't been for years. But nonetheless, you're reminded because carbon fiber build, the branding, I mean, this is a VAIO, no question about it. And I love VAIO machines. Historically, they were always a favorite of mine, and they still are. And if I had to choose one today, this would be it with the 4K display option. But now to the not so great stuff. I mean, very powerful, very lightweight. But first thing, much like its, again, small sibling, the SX12, battery life. You do not have great battery life. You're looking at actually around the same, maybe even a little bit less than the SX12, which is between 6 and 7 hours. And that's not with brightness all the way up like I have now and doing high intensity processing applications. Remember, we don't have 10th gen Intel GPU under the hood here. So from a graphics perspective, not very strong. But again, with the Comet Lake CPU, that i7 having 6 cores is still, from a raw horsepower perspective, very impressive in such a lightweight ultrabook. I mean, hard pressed to find anything else that directly competes with this. In fact, I don't think there is. I mean, other than, and I mentioned this in the SX12 review, the Dell XPS 13. And I do think this is a better machine than that. You know, if you're going with the 4K display, you're going to see a bigger hit on battery life. I don't have it here, but it's inherent based on the fact that with a full HD display, we are getting yields that are similar to what we see with 4K displays from competing products. So that's one area I wish that VAIO had done better. As far as fingerprints go, this thing is a magnet. The exterior shell, not as bad, but it will, over time, of course, with that matte finish, get dirty. No touch screen. I should have said that at the top. If I didn't, I repeat it now or re-emphasize it. And that's because VAIO is going strictly business. We've got all these ports. We've got lightweight, all the processing power. So it seems like a zero compromise machine, but as I mentioned, battery life is the biggest compromise. The next is this trackpad. It's the same thing with the SX12. And of course, pricing, because for this made in Japan product, you are paying a premium, no question about it. And I believe that this model will set you back around $1,800. And of course, if you're going up to the 4K and top tier specs, which this is almost there, you're just going to be talking about a 1 terabyte SSD, you're well over $2,000. I mean, those machines top out in another realm. So very expensive, no question about that. But over time, price will go down. If you look at the 8th gen SX12 and SX14s right now, I think they are priced competitively. Of course, they aren't new products anymore, so that's one drawback. The keyboard is good, not great. It's another thing I'd like to see VAIO improve besides the trackpad and battery life. Key travel isn't as much as what I have on, you know, my HP Spectre or what you'll find in Lenovo's laptops, but it's enough. It's not a bad typing experience. It's still good. I think the thing to note is that it is silent, and it's a big deal. I mean, when you really take into account the environment that I think this machine is being pitched for, which is predominantly professional use, then it's good that it's a very quiet machine. I mean, I don't think it's ever bad that a keyboard would be quiet, except for on my desktop. You know, I've got that Logitech clicky G915, which I love. But if you're talking about traveling, being in public, being in a work environment with other human beings, then, you know, it would be beneficial not to have a machine that attracts attention, at least in that capacity, or in any other for that matter. And that's exactly what the VAIO represents. So let's take a look at some video playback. Again, the full HD 14-inch panel here is not bad. It's just not as good as what I'd like to see from VAIO considering the premium price. That's my best way of putting it. And you'll also hear the speakers here, which are another thing, as you can see, full volume, and it is full volume, that absolutely could and should be improved by VAIO on the next refresh. I know this is a compact machine, again, basically the lightest 14-inch ultrabook out there, but the speakers, albeit that they're stereo speakers, are not really any better than what I have on like the Note 10 Plus, my smartphone. So I just want to see them do more with this. And again, the screen quality is good. It's just we're now in a world where display quality is so good. I mean, my Spectre has an OLED that, well, some people love, some people hate, but I assure you is in another league, and I want to see VAIO make that transition. I would love a touchscreen. If we don't get a touchscreen, I can live without it. But I do want to see higher overall quality. And even though I know the 4K version of this laptop will have better quality, it still is not going to be the experience I'm looking for because of the battery life issue that I've mentioned through the course of this, as well as the SX12 review. So to recap, we've got great processing performance. Basically anything that anyone is going to need to do with a CPU, you're going to be able to handle it. So photo, video editing, no problem. Same applies to the SX12. Gaming, that's out because you've got an integrated GPU here that is several generations old, and just it's not going to really be able to cut anything. I mean, I'm not saying you can't play anything, but trust me, you'd be better off not playing anything. Not having Thunderbolt 3 on here is another thing I wish we had. It's not part of the chipset, unfortunately. So while you've got great CPU performance, there are the drawbacks like the GPU, and at least in this case, no Thunderbolt 3. We have Type-C for video and data transfer, but not at the highest bandwidth that obviously we could be using, especially when it comes to external GPU, stuff like that, which would be a good pairing with this Comet Lake processor. Battery life, it's another miss on here. I mean, you have to be willing to make the compromise that you're going to have the most powerful, lightweight machine on the market, and in that same breath, you're okay with the fact that you will be bringing the charger with you pretty much everywhere. The upside is that VAIO's own quick charge on the pin type charger that's included, which looks like every other VAIO charger from years past, does work fairly well. It is pretty fast, so that really is the best part of the story there. So, in like 30 minutes, you can go from, or it was about 40 minutes, you can go from 0 into the 70s, which I was impressed with because I wasn't expecting that, but it's still a long way from what it should be in terms of battery life. And that's really what VAIO needs to correct. We need solid battery life in order for this machine to command the price it does. We need a better display. We need a bigger trackpad. The keyboard is really a minor critique in the scope of things, at least with the list of different peripherals that I've gone over here. I mean, the 14-inch version I'm looking at here is pretty much my dream machine if VAIO can address the things that I continuously have mentioned. If they were to put an OLED into one of these, if they were to give us touchscreen, I mean, it has everything that I would want in terms of form factor. The keyboard is good enough. We just need that bigger trackpad, Thunderbolt 3, and some battery life. And this machine would be, without any question, the best laptop on the market, no matter what their asking price. I mean, it already gets to about $3,000, I believe. $2,899, I think, is the top of the line for this machine, which is a lot of money. So at that price, I think that they could really deliver all of those things and still make this in Japan. So here's to hoping that's what we see in the next gen. But if you're in the market for a PC here in 2020 and you do want the most powerful, lightweight machine that money can buy, the SX14 is that machine. It's just, again, at the expense of battery life, that tiny trackpad, and no Thunderbolt 3. And of course, no graphics, really. I mean, the 620 that you have in here as opposed to the Iris Plus is a real big drop-off. The last thing, and it's the same last thing that I mentioned with the SX12, is heat dissipation. Both this and the SX12, I believe, I didn't open them up, but I do have the marketing information, are driven, cooled by a single fan. And it doesn't really get too hot, and part of that is just what VAIO's been doing for years. It's not a new thing. They don't generally run as hot as a lot of other machines. Part of that is that we're dealing with this carbon fiber build, which is really versatile, and that's a good thing. When the fans do kick on, or the fan, excuse me, you will hear something. Now, I, in my SX12 review, talked about the fact that it sounds a little bit like a high-pitched noise. It's not bad. It's not like a coil whine, but it kind of reminds me of that, and that will put off some users, no question about it. I do still love the hinge that VAIO's been using now for several years. It lifts up the entire deck, makes sure that things stay ventilated well, and it's just a good design. A lot of other manufacturers are moving in this direction. So VAIO isn't the only one out there, but they are when it comes to having all of these ports. The full-size SD card slot, especially on the SX12, is just nuts. VGA, if you still need it, you know, smoke them if you got them, even though I wouldn't. It's a great machine. You cannot upgrade RAM. You can upgrade the SSD. Not sure why you would, because, I mean, more storage if you need it. But if you're going to buy one of these, I hope that you're getting the configuration you need right out of the box. And then on top of everything, you do really have a machine that can do just about everything. And again, who else has a laptop made in Japan these days? Color options are out there, but I personally will always prefer this matte black. It's the original real deal in the VAIO lineup. I'm not saying that back in the day Sony didn't have other colors, but this is where it started. I mean, one of my first ultralight laptops from Sony was a VAIO, and this is exactly what it looked like, for better or for worse. I could break it out one of these days. I still have it somewhere in storage, so it could make an appearance if people actually wanted to see it. But most of you probably know what they look like. It's not a new story. Like I said, the design language is intact, and that's a good thing. It's distinctly VAIO. No one's going to wonder, you know, do you have a Dell? Do you have an HP? Do you have a Lenovo? Do you have a Mac? Because VAIO has kept it real all this time. If you're a fan of their design, of course, which I am. And I think they did a good job. They need to make the improvements, though, that I've mentioned here, because at the price point, those are kind of a must here in 2020. But overall, if they do make those 2 to 3 tweaks, this is a dream machine, and I absolutely would be all in on this. I would definitely get rid of my HP Spectre in favor of a machine like this. If they could also make the speakers better, it wouldn't be a bad thing, right? And one thing I neglected to mention was on the software side, completely clean install. Another thing to appreciate about VAIO, it's very similar to what you get with, you know, a Surface, a Microsoft device, that the OS, it's, you know, Windows 10 Pro, and there's no crap on there. It's only what should be there, which is the operating system and all the drivers for the hardware, no other crap. And that's critical to me. I want a clean install. I hate when Dell and HP load it up, and, you know, you always want to do a clean install on day one. God, just give us the option to pay to get rid of that if we have to, if you really have sold your souls that much. And I'm not knocking them, but you know what I mean. My HP is my daily driver. It's a beautiful piece of hardware, but there's more than something to be said for a clean install, and VAIO gets that right, thank God. Beyond that, you know, they got to make those improvements. I say it over and over again because I don't want anyone to buy this with expectations that are unrealistic. And they can do it. It's definitely within their ability. Hopefully, as I mentioned in my SX12 review, we'll see a reboot of the Z Canvas. I can only hope. That would be great. And if they could make it in a 14-inch size, I think that would be my perfect machine, but with a little bit of a better keyboard. Here's to hoping VAIO's listening on that. But this is a really good laptop, and the software that they have for management in terms of battery life, I mentioned in the SX12, just peppering it in here at the end. It's important because you can actually maintain the battery, something that most manufacturers do not care at all about, which means that your battery won't die in a year and a half or 2 years. So that's good. You know, if you control the actual level to which it charges, you know, to get to 100%, so making that 80, it goes a long way in terms of maintaining the battery over the long haul. And the performance modes are, you know, like any other manufacturer, quiet, performance. I mean, they're all there. So you want it to be cool, you get it cool. You want it to be silent, you get it silent. You want to let everything go for full power, you go that route. Key reassignment, stuff like that. VAIO's been doing that forever. My Z Canvas had that too. That was much more useful than it is here. There's no real reason to reprogram any keys. But overall, good machine. They got to make those adjustments that I've mentioned 100 times through the course of the video. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.